Will you walk us through just sort of like what he was found guilty on and what exactly happened here?
Sure. So Sam Bankman-Fried was he's 31 now, but he was the founder and CEO of FTX, one of the biggest crypto exchanges in the world, where people bought and sold crypto, and also bought and sold sort of risky products like derivatives related to crypto. And then he had a hedge fund called Alameda Research. And for many people, he was the face of crypto in the United States, and perhaps in the English-speaking world. He was throwing money around everywhere, including on Capitol Hill. And about a year ago yesterday, really, his companies began to collapse when there was a balance sheet leaked that showed that they basically had a very rickety foundation, mostly made up of FTT, a token that Sam Bankman-Fried invented. It was the house token for FTX. And eventually he was arrested in December of last year and charged with 7 felonies and brought to the US from the Bahamas, where his company was based. And he's really charged with some basic financial crimes that you might see on Wall Street. Securities fraud, commodities fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and other conspiracy charges that reflect the fact that he did this with at least 3 other people who have already pled guilty.
Was this a situation like when I hear this story a little bit, as far as I've read into it, which I admittedly is not that much. A buddy of mine, we've had him as a frequent guest. We haven't had him on in a while. Wrote about a guy named Sam Israel, who had a hedge fund that he thought he had figured out the market, and started to realize like he was underperforming. So he started to sort of like fix the books and tell everybody that he was making money, and he kept looking for ways of like, and so he was sort of basically running a Ponzi scheme in terms of returns, and just thought like, I'll score big over here and then I'll just put the money back in. And is that what happened here? Or was this a situation where he was just like pulling money out of his clients' funds to just, I don't know, live in the Bahamas or party or basically, in many ways change the course of our politics for several years?
Very much so. A lot of frauds start the way you just described, which is, hey, I'll dip in a little bit, or we have some short-term problems. Let's, do something illegal or move some money around, something like that. So the basic thing that happened here was that FTX had billions of dollars in customer funds. People deposited US dollars to buy crypto, and that money was supposed to stay there in those bank accounts and not be moved, so that when people wanted to withdraw, they could withdraw. And that's how the crypto industry is supposed to work. What turned out was that basically Sam Bankman-Fried was moving billions of dollars from FTX to Alameda, his hedge fund. And as you said, he was buying luxury real estate. He was investing in companies. He was throwing money around in Capitol Hill, making tens of millions of dollars in donations. So whatever initially animated this, whether it was, hey, to get past some bad trades or some short-term losses that happened to Alameda Research, his hedge fund, it grew into something much more. Even in court, Caroline Ellison, the former CEO of Alameda Research, who dated Sam Bankman-Fried, she said that when he started FTX, he saw it as a source for cash for Alameda. So even if initially perhaps there was a little bit of tiptoeing into fraudulence, it became just an open door. And really, actually, a lot of the money never quite got to FTX. FTX customers were instructed to deposit their money into bank accounts controlled by Alameda. Again, this was all controlled by Sam Bankman-Fried because he owned both companies, but they were supposed to be operating separately, and he simply was never doing that.
So if I understand it, this the FTX didn't statutorily could not function like a bank, right? I mean, I put my money into a bank account. They loan it out to other people, and if it's a commercial bank, I guess, or an investment bank, they will use it for their products, and they need to have certain capital requirements. They can't pull out all that money, but they can pull out some enough to keep it in there. But under statutorily, FTX was not allowed to do any of that. It all had to just sit there as if it was like a brokerage account.
Right. And
okay.
FTX often acted like a bank, but really an offshore, unregulated one. And if we're talking about fraud, fraud is basically promising one thing, especially in contracts or legal agreements, and then doing another in private. It requires a certain amount of intent, and I think that's what the prosecution proved here, was just that simply he was doing this very much intentionally and didn't see FTX as this separate concern that where the money should stay put. He thought he had free access to it.
Can you talk about some of that evidence of intent? Because my understanding is it was pretty brazen.
It was. I mean, this is really a story about ego and the sheer presumptuousness, I think, of Sam Bankman-Fried, and which extends from, I think, the milieu in which he grew up and the sort of coddled, privileged nature of his life. But Sam never really seemed to have a problem with breaking the rules or bending them or just simply overlooking them. And I think what we found in court was that, of course, that finally caught up to him. There were 3 former executives there, including Caroline Ellison, the former CEO of Alameda, who had pled guilty to these same crimes, to doing them with Sam at his behest. And then they testified against him. They were all, to be honest, I mean, they're all sort of math or engineering nerds, and they have that kind of precision in how they testified. I mean, of course, they worked with the prosecutors beforehand, but they gave clear answers. They were very specific. Sam told me this at this point, in this room. And then there was a lot of documentary evidence. There was screenshots of Signal chats, of Slack chats. There were emails. There were Google documents. There really was just a lot to show that this wasn't just some accident or some oversight. This was pretty much directed. Sam chose when money moved and how it was spent.
And that's why it was just such a shockingly quick kind of prosecution. 5 months, or maybe actually, I'm sorry, it was 5 hours that the jury deliberated on all of this. I'm not exactly sure how long the whole process was, but for this kind of financial investigation and the amount of money that we're talking about here, this kind of thing usually lasts years, right?
Right. So the whole is something like $9 billion. I mean, they moved more than that to Alameda, but the whole in the end was about $9 billion. And I think the reason why this stuff went so quickly was, one, you had a very motivated prosecution. Hey, this was a big disaster for a lot of American consumers. It was very embarrassing for the American political elite, which took a lot of money from Sam Bankman-Fried. And then there was just all this evidence. And you had 3 inside co-conspirators who were ready to cooperate. I mean, we heard from Nishad Singh, a former executive there, and all these people were good friends with Sam Bankman-Fried. Some of them looked up to him. But Nishad Singh had said he was suicidal in the aftermath of the company's collapse. And when he really found out what happened, I mean, I think all these people were complicit. They certainly pleaded guilty, but some of them didn't know the extent of things or where Sam was moving the money. They kind of just went along with it. Someone like Gary Wong, the co-founder of both of Sam's companies, he said that Bankman-Fried would tell him, sign this loan. It's going to be in your name, and we're taking out a loan for $50 or $100 million. And Wong would just do it. But what we heard in the testimony from people is that, yes, they're complicit, but there was also some relief. Caroline Ellison has said that she was relieved when the whole thing collapsed, that the lies could sort of end. And I think the main distinction you see here is that Sam Bankman-Fried didn't seem to feel anything, really. As by his own admission, he has difficulty feeling empathy for others, and he seemed to think that this could go on forever. Whereas his co-conspirators, at least at the very end, they took some responsibility and show that this was weighing on them because this was a disaster and this was a criminal operation.
But I thought he was an effective altruist. He's not able to feel empathy for others. I mean, that's what he branded himself as in order to, get some at least temporary green light for his crimes.
And I think we've seen between his interview with Vox last year, when he sort of said that all the effective altruism stuff was possibly BS, and then in the trial where we learned that his image as sort of this sort of awkward, funny-looking CEO who was a little bit eccentric. This was all very calculated. And, I mean, you can psychologize however much you want and say this guy's a sociopath or something like that. But I think it's fair to say by now that his public image was very carefully constructed and that effective altruism well, one is probably not a very legitimate philosophy, but it was for him certainly a cover for this moving money around and for greed.